Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have a wonderful show today with two marvelous poets, Amy Gerstler and James Ragan. Amy will read first, but before she reads, I just want to say I have admired and respected Jim and Amy for 4 decades. I also want to say that Amy's mother-in-law, Kay Wiseman, who has read poetry on this show many times, who is a luminous reader, lives in the villa at MPTF. Amy Gerstler's most recent book of poems is Index of Women, Penguin Random House 2021. Her work has appeared in a variety of magazines and anthologies, including the New Yorker and Paris Review. She is currently collaborating with composer, actor, and arranger Steve Gunderson on a musical play. Her previous books of poems include Scattered at Sea, Dearest Creature, Ghost Girl, Medicine, Crown of Weeds, Nerve Storm, and Bitter Angel. In 2019, she received a Foundation for Contemporary Arts C.D. Wright grant. In 2018, she was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship. She has written fiction, nonfiction, journalism, and art criticism. Here's a magnificent poet, Amy Gerstler.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you for thank you for inviting me to come here. Hi, MPTF, little heavenly place. And as Harry said, home of my beloved, amazing stepmother-in-law, Kay Wiseman, who Harry has introduced to so many poets. And I hope everyone there appreciates how lucky you are to have this wonderful series that Harry is helming here. I get very excited when Kay shows me the poems that you're looking at every week. I'm like, oh yes, Neruda. Oh, so it's a lovely thing, and I'm happy to be part of it. And I'm honored to be asked by Harry, who is a hugely respected and beloved poet. So I'm going to read you a few poems on this hot afternoon. The first one is about the tooth fairy. I don't know if you had parents who told you that if you lost a tooth when you were small, there would be a strange creature that would come in and trade your tooth for some kind of prize. But I thought this was a pretty scary idea when I was a kid, actually. So I wrote this tooth fairy sonnet. It's from the point of view of the tooth fairy. I can't tolerate daylight, so I slip into the dim of kids' bedrooms at night, adorned with necklaces made of baby teeth. The color white makes me wretch. I'd like to resign, become something other than a fang collector. I can fly, but only as a limp, boneless ghost, a spectral jellyfish with floating skirts, a marble quarry whirlwind. I smell of chalk dust, old dental records, ossuaries, loss, and skeletons cleaned of meat. My breath is a whiff of extinction. I have eyes like mustard seeds. No, I'm not pretty. To reach your world of porcelain drinking fountains and molar rotting caramels, I navigate a long, winding tunnel. Each evening, parts of which are dark and parts of which are the hurt pink of a sore throat. So that's the tooth fairy having her say, or one version of her say. This next poem that I'm going to read is called The Meek, and it's sort of my response to always being reminded of that phrase from the Bible that the meek will inherit the earth. The meek. They sit apart at parties, wilting like neglected houseplants. Their music is easily confused with white noise. When the booze runs out, none of them has the nerve to shoulder into his coat and hike to a nearby liquor store for more. You never catch them wearing bright colors. Their laughs are half swallowed. They yawn a lot, wallow in apology, kneel, plead. Their sea of griefs has been rising since humanity began. So what's their plan? Most of the matter in the universe is invisible, and the meek teeter on the cusp of the unseen. When we notice them at all, we're distracted by bowed heads, tight smiles, benign disguises, behind which lurks an eternity of mildness, and perhaps a ravening saber-toothed surprise. Okay, everybody's writing their pandemic poems, and I am no exception. And they're pandemic novels and diary entries and nonfiction pieces. So this poem is called Pandemic Lullaby. All day long, you wring yourself out, work virtually, go nowhere, brain exclusively tuned to end times music, till twilight arrives to fold you in blue pleats of evening. A flock of night herons flaps past, across the sky or your mind. It's the same either way. Long closeted thoughts rise with them, winging out from daytime roosts to forage swamps and wetlands, to nest in groups. Black-crowned birds who croak like crows swoop low over mangroves. The whir of wings, real or imagined, blurs trivial things. Strange time songs declare doom looms. Everyone's muzzled, mired in dread. The future's not mutual. It's mute or dead. Everybody misses everybody. Try to write it out. The night herons seek what the sun will summon us to. A prayer to be spared after endless seeming exile. I shall be satisfied when I wake with thy likeness. The night herons keep flying towards a psalm's promise, toward all tomorrow's garlands. Okay, this is a little poem about kissing, and I know I don't have to explain anything about kissing to anyone listening. Kissing. Kissing occurs in skirmishes, wallops, or big gulps. Pressing lips to lips or lips to objects jolts both souls. Is kissing particular to mammals? Have you watched lizards or insects kiss? Can you imagine kissing our grave, bearded waiter? This kiss delivers a long-awaited verdict. Kissing maps a hazardous passage. Kissing offers prayers on deliverance from danger or a prelude to wounding. Two people kiss at the bottom of a lake, silt swirling around them. Kissing grips kissers as the coldest winter on record gripped Europe. Kissing makes plain the body's resolve. Kissing references a text that no longer exists, which we try to conjure back into existence by kissing. Okay. This poem is a curse. I don't know if you ever have need for curses in your life, but sometimes something makes me extremely agitated and mad. And rather than punch someone in the nose or say something that I will later vastly regret, sometimes I write a little curse. And so if you need one ever, here it is. It's all yours. There's a long tradition of curses. I actually, when I was working on this poem, pulled ideas from ancient Egyptian and ancient Etruscan curses. So it's a time-honored tradition. This is called Cursing of the Party Responsible for Her Suffering. May his scalp sizzle, blister, and itch. May his nose run like the Amazon. May his lips swell to melons. May his tongue bubble with eruptions. May he choke as though he had swallowed a pitchfork. May his stomach combust. May his genitals resemble a witch's pinky and 2 shriveled peas. May he be unable to find his feet. May his bones turn to dough. May his mind drown in the slop of which his soul is composed. Now, don't use it lightly, but, you know, you can get in there with that and do some damage. You can write your own. Okie dokie. This is a poem about somebody talking to a head of lettuce in the grocery store. I don't know if you've ever confronted, when grocery shopping, those big piles of fruits and vegetables, but sometimes they seem like individual beings to me. And so this is somebody talking to a head of lettuce, hence the poem is called To a Head of Lettuce. May I venture to address you, vegetal friend? A lettuce is no less than me, so I respect you. Though it's also true, I may make a salad of you later. That's how we humans roll. Our species is blowing it big time, as you no doubt know. Dependent as you are on water and soil we humans pollute. You're a crisp head, an iceberg lettuce, scorned in days of yore for being mostly fiber and water. But new research claims you've gotten a bad rap, that you're more nutritious than we knew. Juicy and beautiful, your leaves can be used as tortillas. If you peer through a lettuce leaf, the view takes on the translucent green of the newest shoots. Sitting atop your pile next to heaps of radicchio, you do seem like a living head, a royal personage who should be paid homage. I am not demanding to be reassured. I just want to know what you know, what you think your role is, and hear what you have to say about suffering long denied, the wisdom of photosynthesis, stages of growth you've passed through. I can almost hear your voice as I pay for you at the cash register, a slightly gravelly sound, like Kendrick Lamar's voice or early Bob Dylan, both singers of gruff poetic truth. Nothing less was expected from you, Sister Lettuce. Nothing less. Okay. This is a somewhat rhymey poem that's called Storing Up. It will not hold, this whip stitch of peace, this clock tick of calm, this brief release, when no one's sick in this house and there's a mood of safekeeping, when no one's pounding the wall or weeping. Vivid and fleeting the moments flow, a trite thought from several hours ago. Someone yawns, someone else hacks and rasps, but it's nothing, all's well, though this will not last. That for now all the floors are swept, and the animals fed, and the Sabbath kept, and the meal eaten, leftovers tucked away, and the world's chaos held at bay. And those made sleepy by eating put warmly to bed, their heads facing east. No, it will not last, this moment of peace. Yet if the earth keeps twirling, as I trust that she may, Could this blip of grace live in me if I don't scare it away? Okay. Here's a little poem about virginity. Even though I'm in my 60s now, I am still amazed that people make a big deal about virginity. Even when I was young, I was like, what the hell? Everyone has different thoughts and beliefs and orientations about it. I tried to think about what I thought about it when I was young. And that's what I guess this poem, before I'd had sex, and what I thought. Anyway, it's such a bad policy to like explain the poem before you read it. I'll just read it. Virginity. Lying down on the rug with someone and getting dust bunnies in your hair. The eloquence of long pauses. Passing notes rather than speaking. A basement fogged with pot smoke. Trying to read another body via its breathing. The idea that if you kiss someone, you can taste what they just ate. Refusing to eat what your mother cooks anymore, which hurts her feelings. But you can't stand dead sautéed animal inside your mouth now, so you have to spit it out. The myth that innocence is protective. The idea of not being able to stop. Reading secret magazines a cousin stuffed into the bottom of his sleeping bag. The idea that someone curious about your body isn't interested in the private theater of your mind. Theories that there might be a kind of violence about it. How mother insists that without true love, it's just worthless humping. And the idea that for the life you aspire to, she's probably wrong. What your body has promised for so long. The idea of your disastrous premiere. The idea of someone laughing at you after. The idea of hoof prints, stampede damage, stuff crushed underfoot. The idea of keeping all this hidden as you slowly lotus open. So maybe there's time for one or two more before we get to hear James Ragan.
Yes.
So maybe I'll read one more, which is one that's kind of about reincarnation. This one is called Account of Former Lives. I should also say that I'm very honored to be reading in tandem with Mr. Ragan and very much looking forward to hearing his poems. Account of Former Lives. In one life, I drank so hard I always had the spins. In another life, I breastfed several sets of twins. In one life, blips of happiness kept me contented, more or less. In another, I slurped wet harvests from between her thighs. In another, I lived celibate, terrified, and disguised. In one life, my head was full of catchy songs and dances. In another, I got high on taking awful chances. In one life, I was guillotined. In another, I drank kerosene. In one life, I stuttered. In another, I regretted every word I ever uttered. In one life, I fell from a ship's rigging. In another, I was a scrawny boy obsessed with digging. In one life, I had a painful case of housemaid's knee. In another, all I ever wanted was to flee. In one life, I accidentally blinded a child. In another, I was soundly beaten and exiled. In one life, I was a dandy with a wispy beard. In another, I was a dullard who wept as sheep were sheared. In one life, I was a monk who won a newborn in a bet. In this life, Lord knows what is to happen yet. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Amy. What a pleasure. You're such a fabulous poet. You have such a great imagination and erudition and a sense of wonderment, and it's all so real, and your poems just keep opening up with more and more depth, and you're such a sharp observer of what's going on within and without, and also a sense of humor. I always enjoy that. I wanted to ask you, we have a few minutes before Jim comes on, a few questions I'd like to ask you. When did you write your first poem?
In the third grade, I wrote a poem that went like this: hiccups, hiccups, up they perk. I would like to know where they lurk. I think that was my first absolute masterpiece, and my teacher liked it, so I got all excited.
Well, what is, I know you write prose and plays, etc. What attracts you to the poetry form?
Oh, I'd love to ask you that question, and also James. Poems seemed to me to be this, I know not all of them are, but this portable, comforting, compressed, beautiful piece of literature or consciousness or music that you could carry around in your head and heart, because they were the ones I knew when I was young were short and rhymed and easy to memorize. And I found them such a, they were almost like the best drug in the world. It was a little pill, but once you swallowed it, it bloomed out like endlessly and could change your consciousness. And because they were small, you could memorize them and repeat them if you were scared, or make up new words to the rhyme scheme or something like that. So they were like companions, and they seemed magical to me.
Now, I first met you at Beyond Baroque somewhere around 1980.
Wow, yeah.
You and Dennis Cooper and Flanagan, among others. And then how long were you at Beyond Baroque? And then when did you begin teaching at Irvine?
So Harry is referring to this place called Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center that still exists in Venice, California. It's a nonprofit organization that tries to serve literature and the arts, and they have readings and workshops and all kinds of stuff there. And we met there. I heard Harry read there a bunch of times. And I worked there on and off in different jobs for years. And then I started getting teaching jobs at various places. And the job that I have teaching at UC Irvine, I've only had for like the last 8 years. Otherwise, I usually had like 3 or 4 adjunct jobs at different schools.
How has that changed your life, if it has, teaching at Irvine?
Well, for one thing, I don't have to have like 3 different book bags for my 3 different jobs, so I don't get mixed up or mix up the student papers. I can just have one book bag. And I had an office for the first time in my life, which is so great because you can keep books there and you can meet with students there. You can eat lunch there if you're feeling hermit-ish. It's a big luxury to have an office, and it's a great school and a great program. So the students there are really amazing, and that they feel more like colleagues than students, and that's a great thing to have. But I kind of felt that way in most, if not all, of my teaching jobs, actually.
What courses do you teach there?
Writing workshops, and then different sort of literature classes. Sometimes I'll do like 10 poets in 10 weeks. They're on quarters, so they have 10-week stints. Sometimes I've done women poets. I love teaching these classes called hybrid literature, which are different kinds of literature or extracts from literature that don't really fit neatly into a poetry or fiction or nonfiction definition, but kind of pull moves, are kind of odder and maybe harder to classify, and make moves that poetry might make and fiction might make and reporting might make, all in one work.
Now, when you sit down to write a poem, do you start from an image, an idea, a certain amount of words that come to you, an emotion? What do you usually have within you or externally that, kicks off the poem for you?
That was a good list. All those things, or something that you overhear, or something that you see, or something that you dream, or something that really is bothering you, won't leave you alone, won't get it out of your head. And it can be an image or a phrase or a word or a photograph or a memory or something I don't understand. And I'm wrestling with, because I think for me, poems are great places to wrestle with things that seem mysterious or troubling or unknown or unreachable.
You're so bright and insightful about poetry. And if you did, where did you attend college?
Well, you've said many kind things for which I thank you, and thank you again for inviting me to this. I didn't really study literature formally, hardly at all. I was going to be a speech pathologist because I wanted to be a poet, but my dad, who I loved, was all like, "That's a hobby, not a job. Sure, you can do that on Sundays, but what's your serious life's work going to be?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I decided I would be a speech pathologist because I was interested in language, and I worked with autistic kids and stuff. So I have an undergrad degree in child psychology, and very much later in life, like when I was almost 40, I went and got a low residency MFA in nonfiction, because at that point they were going to take my teaching jobs away from me unless I could get an upper division degree. So I had to get one, and I had to get one fast while I could still keep my jobs. But so I didn't have a whole lot of formal literary and arts education, though I did take a couple classes as an undergraduate from this luminous poet who changed my life. His name was Burt Myers, who taught at Pitzer College, where I was an undergrad. He's a lovely poet if you're not familiar with his work.
Well, you've enlightened us today, and you've given us a lot of pleasure. So I want to thank you, Amy, for coming on the show. And our next poet is James Ragan. James Ragan is an internationally recognized poet, playwright, and screenwriter who directed the USC Professional Writing Program for 25 years and is currently professor at Charles University in Prague. Published in 15 languages and 30 anthologies, he authored 10 books with honors, including 2 honorary PhDs and the Emerson Poetry Prize. Ragan's plays have been staged in the US, Moscow, Athens, and Beijing. He worked on staff during the making of The Godfather, a consultant on The Deer Hunter, and on Dom, the Kieslowski screenplay winner at the 2013 Cannes Film Festival. He is the subject of the documentary Flowers and Roots, awarded the Platinum Prize at the Houston International Film Festival. Here's a brilliant poet, James Ragan.
Thank you so much, my God, Harry, for that beautiful introduction. Really appreciate it. I don't know whether you can hear me well enough.
Yes, yep.
First, I want to just thank Amy for such a wonderful reading, and I totally enjoyed it. And it's wonderful to be, a pleasure really to be reading with you today. I also want to dedicate this reading to the Motion Picture, Television, and Film and Television Fund Foundation, with gratitude to Harry for inviting me to come in to read today. Also, I'd like to give a bit of an honor to Holly Prado. Holly was a very dear faculty member of mine at USC, and this reading is dedicated to not just Harry and to the motion picture, television fun, but also to Holly. I enjoyed the responses too that you gave, Amy, to the questions that Harriet had put forth. We all reminded of how we started and when, but I want to get into the poetry that I'll read. But it's funny that my poetry did take me out to the world on a more international level. I started studying pre-med in undergraduate school and somehow had that one professor who comes and says, you should be writing. I enjoy your essays. And suddenly I changed my whole world into reading literature, studying it, and then doing a PhD in that area. But it took me, for example, to Korea. And I remember reading there and coming back and realized how complicated my life had been. And people, and I came home and saw my son, who was about 3 years old, for jumping knights over horses into a castle. And the simplicity of it was so beautiful. So when people would say, would you change your life? I'd say, not one moment of it. So the poem, If for Each of Us, came out of this. If for each of us a rope could swing us long and light across the widening trough of all that fails us in our lives, I would want to land upon the Isle of Echo, lush with repetition, green with being original in birth, and twice the twin a wave might dance along the scurry. I would want a canyon tall for hawks to carry long the deep tattoo of voices on the air. I would want an ear to hear what words to read again to memory, what verse to carol, thoughts to root. For the sparrow's flight the mind has taken comes to rest on truth. I would want to hear a vowel repeat in consonance with alliteration's frothy throat. And should the landing fail its footing, I would want to know what inspiration in shorter flight one syllable might repeat, as in the swash the flat stone makes to skip across the light in water, or the voice the wind gives to birch and linden. I would want the distance to all understanding to narrow just enough to fail at failure. I would want a melody of chances to learn to love again what simplicity I had learned. Free as wonder, soft as touch, and of all things simple, to care again for them as much. My heritage is Slovak, Czechoslovakia. My parents came as immigrants here. I'm one of 13 children. But this, we had many, I love what Amy did when she was going back to just her childhood, but I remember with my own parents. My mother had this favorite story of the mother cat who takes the kitten out on the streets to learn it street smarts. And while they're out there, they run into a dog and the dog growls and the mother barks back. And the kitten looks at them and I said, what was that all about? She says, good to know 2 languages. And so I grew up with that, knowing 2 languages, the sciences, the arts. And I remember also how I felt strongly about some of my first poems, like the limerick form. No one could scan. When told they were so, I said, yes, I know, but I always like to try to get as many syllables into the last line as I possibly can. So, the poetry took an early form for me. It was all over the house, the music, the Slovak, the background. Hunger Wall is a poem I had written. It's a famous wall in Prague where I teach in the summers and take students over. It was built, it was King Charles, who he felt sorry for the poor, so he wanted to pay them. It was the first public works project in history so that he could build this wall, the Hunger Wall. It fits so much of what I write. I care about hunger in the world. I care about the homeless. I care about so much of that. So this is called the Hunger Wall. After walking to the bridge at Karlova, we found the river where at dusk the swans dipped their beaks into the falls for sanctuary. The trees closed in for shade. We gazed through the opposite hill, a single light from a room growing thick with sadness. Solemn smoke now cooked the evening meal. We were just about to treat our hunger well when, out of sunlight undeclared, a shaded massive stone began to stretch its neck along the slope. It would scan the water for a quarter hour before the foliage rubbed its throat, some internal hunger now assuaged for only moments. Then again, the impulse thumbed like whalebone on a drum. The poplars began to rustle. The hawk, spiraling like an aspen deep in chatter, betrayed its nest to block the sun. The dam below rose up to bolder water as if to show how easily wars are won. They feed the hunger wall, the waitress points, the fingers in her skirt, rubbing coins her hands are shoring up to feed the past. I don't want the poor to endure me, she said. King Charles said to those he paid, as he watched their faces building borders, hunger for a wall, as she faced the smoldering Vltava River, watching hunger well. And too often we're too good at watching hunger and doing very little about it. There's a poem that I had returned from one of the trips, and I remember I was at LAX. This is entitled Rilke on the Conveyor Belt at Los Angeles International. As I waited for my luggage, a lone book of poetry by Rilke came flying down onto the conveyor belt. And I can watch the people waiting for their luggage, watching this book go round and again around. And they watched this book, and it struck me that for most of these people, this was probably the first time they were actually forced to acknowledge literature. So this is entitled Rilke on the Conveyor Belt at LAX. A rick of pages, it falls hardly noticed into motion. And on the track unspined, it cycles time between a rucksack and laundry. A book, no thicker than a wallet or a comb, is the unworthy carry-on newly bought, colliding with a carpetbag or a steamer on the unlikely navigation into being where it's not. Each passenger has watched it circle more than once, a bold intrusion into the archipelago of things familiar. There's no fixed point of concentration, no laughter, no elation when the eyes dissect the slow descent of baggage into orbit. As if in taking up an arm strap, each handler slews a body to the spars of his shoulder. Had Rilke himself fallen, unbound, lying in the United States, he would have passed unnoticed by the baggage check or porter who fell to think it odd or such a pity to tag him at the lost and found. How many mouths had his words trespassed? How many cities alive, unread, among so many ports of authority? A gold leaf of art, so grand in the pall of memory, it gives the mind encouragement to survive. Unless, unsung like a soldier's duffel, duty bound, fear spreads its tarp along the spine of language. Creation can end this way, abrupt or final, like travel to the ends of the world with no intent or vision, but destination. This is a poem that I wrote recently. I was asked to actually write something after the shootings in Uvalde, Texas. And this is dedicated to the innocents, those lost to us in mass shootings, most recently in Uvalde and others places. It's titled Not Word Enough. All day, I've waited for breath to climb onto the tongue, not easily. Some might say with a gasping stutter, sliding down the throat's ribbed spine to find the word that refuses to be spoken. Its silence wrapped like shade in the lungs' bowl of darkness. What could I know of nuance, its shape or sound? Elusive like the scent of hatred, neither giving nor forgiving. How in moments of light, when love might have gardened the heart, a life fades amid the dying roots of breath. I would sooner reach out to a crow's beak or climb a steeple and believe as many do in the height and point of things. How in merciful times a syllable's utterance of guilt might suffice. All day I've wondered, what in time is too short a time to kneel before a flowered grave until a death is honored? What in time is too silent a word to ban the triggered power that breeds contempt for a generation's grief? For days I've wandered, searching the riddle of letters for any assemblage of sounds I could justify, for an instance of repentance, for any gift of redemption I could set free from the depth of world pity. In a word, enough is not word enough to silence the rage sorrowed in this song. That's quite new, and a poem that follows this is called A Good Sky. I'm a firm believer that there's always a good sky, no matter what the tragedy. I remember losing my sister recently to COVID, and my wife's mother had died 2 weeks after. And suddenly a good sky is something I believe for all those whose dreams inspire the good sky of a future in all of us, that there's always a tomorrow to look forward to. I show you a good sky. It could hold a fleet of geese above a kite, sipping in a breeze, or foliate the wind with leaves of cherrywood and hedge. It will blanket your sleep with mirrors of stars in the soft undressing of night. It will love you solely through the Venus dawn, the moment before the day's light hangs its spars. I show you a good sky. It will rain its reflection on your one troubled eye, the one that blinks each time a hark rants by. I am no one's romantic. No, I am the sky's shadow wish, writing this only to breathe its light. I show you a falling sun, passing like a lover to be near you, allowing no star or bulb on a corner lamp to possess you as you are. Look, here I am, the sky's moon down. I will shave a horizon out of peaks like none your memory has ever carved. I show you a good sky. Its broad blue ribbon will wrap its mind around your eye's imagination and drift you into smiles. Now, celebrate your days among us and let your inspiration dream a while. This I had the occasion, again, a new poem that was interested in the LA Times at one point in publishing it. They had published a lot of my work in there. This is called Lost Angeles. I had been walking downtown near the mission there when I heard I'll read the poem. Lost Angeles is what I thought he said. The old soul grumbling through his barren roll of gnarled wheat bread and sleep sack at a 6th Street tent on Skid Row. Lost Angeles, he whispered to himself, then louder as I passed, his stutter gambling on the moment he'd saved from a memory gone dark. Damn him, lost, all of them, he muttered sharply, to back me up, an audience of one straddling the curb, with an eye's view of an open arm wound he'd been nursing. All I ask is a night's sleep, he said, tossing up a church bulletin with a name in their death notice underlined, his own. It's gotten to, they lie to prove me gone and never been. My family It was his own dog he'd been talking to. Its tail curled and roped around the pillow shirt it lay beneath, throbbing, the only witness to the old soul's place on this earth, this city, this lost Angeles, this grand design of failed fealty to the found and lost, to the gone and never been. And this has a bit of a prelude. I had the great pleasure, I'm glad that Amy had mentioned Bob Dylan in one of her readings. I had the pleasure of reading with Dylan and Robert Bly and Seamus Haney in Moscow for Gorbachev, 1985. And after the reading, there's an image in this poem, which is Rimbaud, the French poet, Rimbaud. But one of the young girls at the reception came to me and says, "Mr. Ragan, I loved your poem about Sylvester Stallone." And I went, "Rambo, oh my God." When you hear the poem, I have to do this prelude all the time because you'll think that's who I'm talking about. This is called The Tent People of Beverly Hills. It's about the homeless that we see every day in Los Angeles, here, elsewhere across the country. Faceless on the boulevard of mirrors. North along the flats of Rodeo Drive, stripped bald head mannequins. They come treading on the fears of high fashion, the homeless, tents on their back, and on their cheeks the beach black tar of tasteless chic. As if to dress were not enough, we would have us wash our backhand slap off their Rambo faces. And all through the supple stick flash of their eyes, all through the wind whiskers of fishbone and sour cream curdled by fame, they see along the deli box bins and fruit stalls of Wilshire Boulevard, the world. In their small walk space. They were never certain whether they were merely asked to fill a role like some memory in some thoughtful dream of place, or live always short of measure in some dying minor sort of way. As if to live were time enough, we would have them end beyond their means. Hours long they scrabble onto walls and mirrors the words they would like to leave us. The haunted prince of thought falls, drifting out of mind's possession like nostalgia or grief. The world has lost its face. There are no hobo kings or pioneers late to live by. When they lie above the windy steam, all dream gone, their minds warm, their bodies whole to sleep. They wake to be awake. In the dreams of many who never took the road to gypsy sorrow, breathing is enough. It is a mistake to feel themselves alone, to fill their sky holes up with dark. There has never been a need for crying. The dying always say, once you move within the final inch of breath, there is no other. There are a million tents in the universe with holes we mistake for stars. I always like to read this in my reading because if there are poets and writers and all writers, they know what rejection is. We get enough of it in our lives, and this was a letter I received from Japan for my poetry, and I thought I love reading this. It's a Japanese rejection letter, I call it, but I'll read it here for those who understand that deep sense of loss when you get that letter. But this one was special. It goes, "We have read your work with inexpressible pleasure. We swear on the sacred memory of our ancestors that we have never before encountered such a masterpiece. If we publish your admirable work, His Majesty the Emperor will undoubtedly insist on it being a model for all future writing, and will forbid our publishing any work inferior to yours. Since talents like yours emerge only once in every 1,000 years, this would put us out of business. And we must therefore refuse your divine work and deposit it at your feet, trembling at the thought of the severe judgment we shall receive from future generations for failing to include in our pages work of such sheer genius. And I'll read another newer poem. This is called, I'm always reminded of Will Rogers, who always said that, there are three kinds of men: the ones who learn by reading, the few who learn by observation, and the rest of them have to pee on the electric fence to find out for themselves. This is the weight of an umbrella. Before its slick vinyl could wing its carapace out above the body's width of shoulders, before the tin ribs could arch to challenge the airhead displaced in the sudden lift of sky, before the knobbed handle could power up the palm's easy grip manipulation to deflect the assault of an Arctic wind or the full force of a child's fisted sword. It had been a thing of furniture, hanging as adornment off of the carved oak stair or the hook of a hat tree rack. Before I could legislate the crowning of a cap on the hard breathing of my balding scalp, it had grown to be a thing of need, like a walking cane or a tent restraining the elements of a cloud's quick temper. It had never denied its role in knowing what history of wind or sun it had rejected, what weight in swallow drops it had to pay to save the ground from the deep soak of grime. You would think it might find a greater need than saving such a brainless head as mine. I don't know how much more time, not much, huh?
Well, we have, we have 7 minutes. If you want to read, you can read. If you want to talk, we can talk.
Okay, let's talk, but I'll finish one more, and it's called The Astonishment of Living. It's dedicated to my two daughters. I have a son and 2 daughters, and this is called The Astonishment of Living. It's a good one to end on. I saw beneath the spreading elm. I wrote this in Prague. I saw beneath the spreading elm 2 talking girls weaving rainbows in their eyes. I saw their lives on opposite shores of the river yield up their buckets to the falls. Every drop was bathed in the fragrant shawls of eglantine. Every leaf in wind rising up to comb each branch sent a whisper out along the slope. Let go. Let go the breath in rain and every strand of light in fog. Let go of the tongue's crow until it sings along with rocks and runnels as if it were divine. Let go of honored sky and earth. Let go the horizon in between. Lose all the sunlit undulations of the season's wheat and sing. Sing out to seeds, to grass, to all that breathes into the pores of stones. Let go the sovereign moons of space, the celestial laws of Ariels, breathing out a planet and pulsing out its days. And where the stars ignite in showers, let them fall. Recite the moment's song that tomorrow wind will bring in squalls. Free the century's melody as you would a line or burden down a well. Allow the astonishment of living one reed or willow, feeding swallows through a hungry night until they weary of elation. Let all buckets fill, all loss be light. I saw 2 talking girls weaving rainbows in their eyes, and daughtering in me their dreams. I grew astonished by all conception, by the frail grandeur of life.
Well, thank you, Jim, for that fabulous reading. I just love the last poem. It's so lovely. I know how much you love your family. And there's so much eloquence and sagacity. You go so deep in poetry. I want to ask you a couple of questions. But first of all, take your poem on Rilke coming around on the belt at LAX. When you write a poem, do you write it in one shot or do you rewrite? Just take us through and let us know how you write a poem.
Yeah. No, I'm known for revision and revision and revision. I let a poem sit for months. I'm writing another, but I'll let poems sit and I'll come back at them and I'll come in and change and hear it again. And I remember being in Paris and suddenly became a cafe writer. And I love the library of people walking by me. And suddenly I felt the same about the music that entered my poetry. It was very much from my Slovak. I speak 2 languages, more than 2. I speak 5 languages, but Slovak was my first language. So that's why the music will come through the poetry. But I do a lot of revision. I let time go. Some poems will take 2 years to finish before I'll put it out.
Well, I noticed the musicality, which I love in your poetry. I think, Amy and I were talking about Beyond Broke. If my memory is right, it seemed to me like in the mid 70s when I was in the workshop there, that you came one time. Joseph Hansen was
That's
there.
That's right. I read there.
You read there in the class. And I remember, didn't you graduate from Ohio State, or is that my...
Ohio University, got my undergraduate.
I remember you talking about that. And you have so much knowledge about literature, obviously. So we have a couple of minutes here. When did you write your first poem? And also, what attracts you to the poetry form?
I think that I was always writing, as Amy said, even as a child, I was reading it. My parents would read it in Slovak, but I remember when I got the English, I'd be reading it, and sometimes I would just little words, little things I would put. But it wasn't until I went to graduate school that I took it seriously, that I suddenly won a couple big prizes very early as in my graduate studies, and I up against some very good poets, and I couldn't believe it. Anne Stanford was a good friend, and suddenly, I had so many writers and poets that influenced me early on, and so I would say that I took it seriously when I was in graduate school, but I was already working on it and writing it before that.
Now, what would you say to a young poet who's sitting down to write her first poem? What would you tell her to concentrate on or focus on?
Go out and live life. Go out and live life. It's all out there for you. That's what I would say first, is that I believe that, what I always feel, basically, is that's given me the fullness of my life, that I wasn't afraid to live through the tragedies, live through the joys, that I approached them, that I was a dissident, that I was under house arrest in Prague when the Russians invaded. And so this is part of the life that many of our young writers, poets, are not facing. And I didn't want them to become the victims of a tabloid culture. I want them to read books. We become a bit of a post-book reading generation. It's a shame, but it's happening. But I would tell them to live the life and feel strong about your own visibility and your own identity.
Well, we're about ready to close. And I just want to thank you also for your compassion. I can see it in your poetry. You empathize with people, the homeless, among others. And so that's number one. And number two, I also want to thank Jennifer Clymer, the director here, for asking me to do this poetry show. And I want to thank you too. I could listen to you two for many hours. So it's been a real pleasure and an education. And then finally, I just want to say that next week, Sarah McClay will read Lorca and talk about Lorca's poetry, and Gail Ronsky will read the poetry of Wallace Stevens and talk about his poetry. They're both professors at Loyola. So the time is up, and this has been wonderful. So thank you, James Ragan, and thank you, Amy Gerstler.